Hello, welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's a great pleasure to welcome today's program, Jose Minato, who is Senior VP of Customs at Transplace. And today we're going to talk about the new NAFTA. What's changed? What's the impact? Renegotiating NAFTA, which is coming up on 25 years now, has been kind of one of the priorities for, the current U.S. administration. And, after a lot of, back and forth negotiations between the U.S. and Mexico and Canada over the past year, it seems like they've reached a new agreement, which is set to be signed, pretty soon here. So the question is, what's changed? What's going to be the impact, particularly for companies that trade with Mexico, between the U.S. and Mexico, and how should shippers respond in along the lines of these changes? Well, those are just going to be some of the questions we're going to address today. And, it's certainly great to have Jose on the program, who's on the front lines of all this in his role there at Transplace, to kind of share his insights and perspective on this topic. So, Jose, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I'm pretty happy to be here. I'm having this interview today from the city of Querétaro, Mexico. I just walked out of a NAFTA conference where everyone is asking the same questions. What is next, right? So happy to be here.
Great. This is such a timely and important topic. So I'm glad we were able to kind of put this on the schedule. And I got to say, I love that you're calling me Adrian, because the only person that calls me Adrian today is my mother still. So it's nice to hear the Spanish pronunciation of my name. But before we dive into kind of the topic at hand in NAFTA, you're a first-time guest on Talking Logistics. I always love to kind of get a little bit of background and understand how people got into this industry to begin with. So why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about, your career path, how you got involved with, supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Transplace.
I appreciate it. Yes, I would like to share that I started my career in international business back in 1994, same date that NAFTA was being issued. So I consider myself a baby NAFTA. I'm an industrial engineer, started my career in a border town named Juarez, and I worked for the maquiladora industry for 4 years before becoming an international trade professional. So I had the good luck of understanding what was going on with Mexico and the transformation from a pure agricultural producing country into a manufacturing power. I worked for the last US TV manufacturer, which it was Zenith Electronics, and they had a 1 million square feet facility where we manufacture huge wood cabinets, which was what we all wanted to have for our homes. So I saw the transformation, especially in the border towns, on how foreign investment was offering the opportunity to Mexico to become a manufacturing power. Fast forward, I lived for 11 years in El Paso. Then I've been in Laredo for 23 years now, working for major global forwarders or customs brokerage operations. My backbone has always been running customs brokerage operations both in the US and Mexico side. And I still remember 23 years ago when I arrived to Laredo and they told me that the port was crossing 3,500 trailers per day. And to me, that was a big number. Nowadays, I just heard that we're going to close 2018 with 14,000 crossings per day in Laredo, Colombia. So we've had a chance to look at a lot of different aspects of the trade between the two countries. We as a company are crossing an average of 600 trailers per day. 80% of those trucks are either raw materials coming in or finished product from manufacturing industries. So I've had the luck to see what NAFTA has brought to Mexico, and I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Well, no, that's great. So a broad range of experience there, and I think that statistic you mentioned in terms of what the border crossings were at the beginning and what they are today. I think that's a good measuring stick of kind of the trade activity that has increased so much over the past, 2 decades, plus between the U.S. and Mexico. So let's get started here, and kind of before we dive into kind of what's the recently proposed changes. Let's talk a little bit about the impact that NAFTA has had on the U.S.-Mexico trade since it went into effect in 1994. I mean, you kind of shed a little bit of light there, just showing that growth. But overall, I mean, has you seen it as mostly positive, mostly negative? And if so, in what ways?
Thank you. I've seen only positive. I don't think Mexico would be in the economic status that it has today without the NAFTA and the manufacturing and the change that it had in our lives. So it basically turned Mexico into a manufacturing country, along with development of skilled labor in the production line and professionals in the support areas, in engineering, quality, logistics, HR. University systems all over Mexico have evolved to support these professional preparation areas. And I've seen how a lot of people from smaller towns relocated to the highly industrialized parks that we have today in manufacturing clusters. We saw right after the investment from US corporations, because of NAFTA, we saw the followers coming from Asia, Korea, China, Japan, Europe, and North America. They arrived and settled also assembly and sub-assembly type of operations. The main industries that we deal with on a daily basis are electronic, electric, automotive. And when I say automotive, it's auto and truck, tier 2, tier 3, air conditioning, metal stamping, construction, paper, cable, textile, even agricultural equipment. So that was part of the big change. It started, Adrian, as border twin plants along the Mexico and US border, choosing certain regions for specialized products, such as TVs, big in the Tijuana market, right? But then it evolved to the interior of Mexico in markets such as Guadalajara, where they concentrated in electronics. And then on the center of Mexico, what we call the Bajío region, the automotive just exploded over the last 10 years. So it has brought considerable progress to Mexico because of the evolution also from 24 years ago. We saw manufacturing as very labor-intensive processes. And nowadays we have a lot of automation and high-tech industries arriving and exploring the Mexico capability, such as the aerospace industry in Querétaro, the city where I'm sitting today.
Yeah, that's great. I like the even the broader perspective in terms of the ripple effect that it's had in terms of the education, the types of the skills and training that goes into the into the country as a result of kind of moving away from, or not moving away from, but expanding the economy from agrarian to more manufacturing in all these areas. Certainly, yeah. I mean, I think what happens here in the United States is you talk about NAFTA. There's always a lot of political discussions around it and different perspectives on it. But I think there's certainly a lot of positives from the U.S. standpoint as well, because the reality is that supply chains have becoming more global, and whether it was Mexico or things were going to be more built in Asia or so forth, you can't really stop that trend, and particularly from a shorter cycle time standpoint. I mean, I think that's one of the areas that I see is kind of keeping some of this regional manufacturing, even though it's not being done in the United States, but the fact that it's much closer and you can react faster to what's happening in the market by having a regional type of approach to your supply chain versus one that extends over oceans. That I think that's something that sometimes gets overlooked in some of these some of these conversations.
I agree.
So let's get now into kind of the specifics of kind of what's been discussed this year. Like I said in my opening remarks, I mean, there's been a lot of back and forth negotiations between the three countries, and kind of a new agreement was just announced not too long ago called USMCA, and I really hope they come up with a new name, because I mean, NAFTA just rolls off the tongue pretty easily, but USMCA, I don't even know how to pronounce that. So hopefully they'll come up with a better acronym that we could all say much easier. But that's kind of the agreement that's on the table right now that's been agreed to, and supposedly it's going to get signed, within the next few weeks here. I mean, what are some of the most significant changes or updates based on kind of what's been disclosed so far?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought it up. None of us have seen the final agreement or the actual regulations. We have all seen drafts, versions of what were the major points of negotiation, so we can concentrate on those. And out of the ones that in my profession, which is to help customers bring goods in and out of the two countries from a customs perspective and transportation perspective, the one that is definitely a must to look into are the rules of origin. One thing that was agreed upon the main industries like the automotive and the electronic, etc., the rules of origin are going to change. And with that said, we have to be ready. The regional value added content is going to change. So that's going to force everyone to look back or look to what we've been doing regarding NAFTA qualification of products. And we're going to have to deal with it. Now, we have new variables that everyone should keep in mind without knowing the specifics. But for the last 24 years, we have qualified products based on a bill of materials. What goes into building a product? What's the pricing on each individual product, and then how much value added goes around it. Now the new treaty is talking about labor costs and minimum labor costs for employees that are in the automotive assembly line. I can tell you from a customs brokerage perspective, we file Mexican entries, which are called pedimentos, or US entries, and none of the fields or none of the reporting statistics that we've done require or have required us to file the labor costs that go along assembly lines. So that one has us really curious as far as, okay, one thing is to say that they're going to enforce it. The other one is is the government really going to keep track of it? Are they going to measure it? Are they going to control it? That's even a big question mark in our minds, and we do this every day. So we should all look into wait for the regulations to come out. Hopefully the agreement gets signed in the next few weeks. We all know that we're in a hurry. We want President Peña Nieto to sign it up before he leaves. And then we also know that U.S. Congress is probably going to take like a year to take it through the whole process and come out with a 2020 agreement. But even with that said, even with the fact that we all know that we have a little bit of time in our hands, my recommendation for the medium and smaller shippers that do not have an internal compliance department is to start looking into what they have. Once we have the final version of the agreement, to dive into the details of what changed in their specific industry, business, product at an HTS level, and then come up with a plan so that they can address the future strategies of sourcing goods, whether that's in the NAFTA region, overseas, and everything else that goes around applying rules of origin to make sure that they are not going to be affected. So that's the only one that I highly recommend that people keep in their radar, because that one is a game changer. From the other aspects that are the natural evolution from a treaty that was signed 24 years ago, when most of us were not big into the information technology world, or something even more contemporary, which are Corrupt Practices Act. I can tell you today, Adrian, our world is changing, because not only are we concerned with customs compliance or national security, which was the twist that we all had to jump into in the last 15 years. Now we are all addressing questions from our legal departments regarding our internal policies, regarding money laundering or improper government arrangements or agreements or facilitation. The word that everyone is using nowadays is FCPA, which stands for Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And that is something that in the new agreement, it's already something that is expected. It is being pushed by the United States, and it is very much being targeted towards Mexico, because the playing field needs to be leveled, and everyone needs to work under the same expectations of running businesses and making sure that we are not allowing for any of those practices to happen in organizations. So that is something that is positive in my mind. It's something that it is a true concern for the world we live in today. And I started talking also about information technology. It has changed drastically the way we do business. Most of the customers that we deal with have an ERP system. Our systems in Mexico or the US, they're all tied to cloud technology that now sits in servers in a different country of the world. So all of that has changed. Intellectual property rights have changed, and we have to address it. Hopefully, when the deal is done, it'll put very clear guidelines or controls as far as what are the correct practices, so that we can all prevent information technology issues, which is a main concern nowadays with everything that we hear in the outside world as far as people logging into systems improperly. Okay, so those three, in my mind, are the ones that ring a bigger bell from a day-to-day activity, starting in order of importance. Keep an eye on rules of origin. Start understanding what's coming regarding Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And in the information technology side, we need to do our homework, because things have changed. And in order for the three countries to play in the same playing field, as I've said before, we need to have very similar rules.
Yeah, no, those are all great. I think, a lot of everything you talked about, I think it kind of really resonated with me. The fact that, we talk about these things in a document, right? It's an agreement, it's a treaty. But then, you really have to think about the ripple effects, because in order to bring that agreement to life, it's going to have an impact on existing processes, the type of data you collect, the type of information you collect, what kind of standards are they going to be around between the three countries around collecting things like the labor cost. How is that going to impact then the way it's communicated, and where in the systems that you're talking about, custom systems, brokerage systems, whatever systems companies have to track their manufacturing, so on and so forth. So it just has such a ripple effect on processes and technologies and standards that, it is going to take some time to bring those rules into reality, if you will, from an operating standpoint. It's funny you brought up the Corrupt Act there, the Corrupt Practices Act. For the first time ever, I received a document from one of my customers where it was redlined by legal, and they inserted a section around bribery and which I suspect is probably related to all this. And I'm a small little, relatively speaking, I'm a small little dinky company, right? And so I can see how that's becoming something that's becoming more widespread with companies, particularly larger companies, and how they work with the different companies, vendors and suppliers that they work with. You mentioned, the last piece kind of brings me to my last question. I mean, how so much has changed in the IT world over the past 25 years. The other thing that's changed a lot is just the role of e-commerce, right? I mean, that's just such a big part of the economy now, and certainly future growth is going to come from e-commerce. From what we've seen, again, does the new agreement, cover e-commerce related trade? And I mean, what are some of the things that are being talked about with regards to e-commerce in this new agreement?
It definitely does, and we all need it because we have all evolved as consumers. Even people my age are starting to buy a lot of stuff via the internet. So Mexico is no different, okay, than the U.S. Uh, Everyone is now using e-commerce to source or to buy their goods, even their grocery products. And what we've seen in the present time is that companies like Amazon that have ventured into Mexico, they are growing exponentially, okay? But the way they're still bringing product through the ports of entry is still in bigger containers. If it's a truck, it's a full truckload with a whole bunch of product in it. If it's ocean, a full container load. The facilitation that we have in ports of entry require us to follow the same formalities and the same processes for a very large shipment than a very small shipment, which means that it's not easy to bring smaller products through the ports of entry, and that's not conducive towards accepting our new reality. Things need to change, because not everything is going to continue to come in large containers and then go to a DC that later on turns around and does the final leg or the delivery to the consumer. Rules regarding e-commerce are coming, the new NAFTA. They're pushing for customs facilitation, and I know exactly why they mean that. Today, there is a special process granted to parcel companies only, that allow you to formalize one entry for everything that is under $5,000 value of merchandise. And that's not much. That will not allow you to simplify, but that's just allow for parcel companies. In the future, e-commerce needs to be widely open for more players to be able to bring product and go through simplified processes in order to satisfy the consumer needs or requirements. From our customs perspective right now, if we just start bringing a lot of smaller shipments, the way Mexico Customs is set up, it will require for us to do a lot of different small entry declarations, which will not be conducive towards being a good partner with Canada and the United States. So where I'm headed with this one is, it is coming. Mexico internally, the national market is ready for it. We are already buying in that fashion, but customs has to evolve very rapidly so that we don't end up creating bottlenecks that will not allow for e-commerce to be the same as US and Canada.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I would just say, based on what I've read as well, here in the United States, we're also not, our customs is also not well aligned with international e-commerce growth. I know we've done some posts from some of our partners that we've published this year, kind of related to that same topic, right? Because it does require kind of a different process to make it more streamlined. But it also has implications on kind of the duties that you're collecting and the tariffs you're collecting, right? If all the stuff is coming in through de minimis or that kind of oversight. So anyway, I think this whole area of international e-commerce, which is the fastest growing segment of e-commerce, is something that I think all three countries are going to have to look at. Again, once we see the details of the new agreement, I think we'll see more there. But certainly that has to be thought out more, and that's going to, like to the earlier point, that's going to require some process changes and some alignment across the three countries to make that as streamlined as possible. So when you compare kind of the existing NAFTA agreement, again, which is coming up on 25 years now, with this new USMCA one, I mean, do you see that as an overall improvement? And again, I guess they kind of sum her up in some ways. In what ways?
I think it will. None of us have business plans that we can do or execute 24 years ago and expect it to be fresh and workable due to the eternal change that we live around. So I think it is positive from the part of negotiation in US and Mexico. I think based on the summary of all of the negotiation points that were on the table at one point and the other, Mexico is pleased with the accomplishments, and the US is also pleased. Canada tagged along at the end and said, if you two are happy, I can live with whatever the two of you can agree as fair play. So I see it as positive. All of the new additions are just adjustments to our current economies, our current world. The financial adjustments are just part of how we do business together as a North America economy. So the backbone of the NAFTA agreement that conduces for the three countries to continue to grow and hopefully allow me to tell the story that today was 14,000 trailers and 5 years from today it's going to be 20. I think the backbone wasn't changed or touched in a way that will affect future growth, which has me personally very pleased on what I see that it's going on. Hopefully they sign it up like everyone wants this year, and they allow us to get ready for the changes so that in 2020 we are all ready for the new agreement, and we can embrace it and use the advantage that we have as a manufacturing power that is attracting more and more people outside of the three countries to settle operations in Mexico and the US.
You know, I love that point. You know, I don't think any, entity, whether it's a company or a government or whatever, can, it would not make sense to base your current operations based on something that was planned or put together 24 years ago, because the world is so much different, today than it was. So I think there was common understanding that, it was time to kind of take a fresh look at, that agreement and make the necessary adjustments. Of course, every country, involved had their own interests that they wanted to, protect or, make sure was in there. And that's where the tough negotiations come in. But it seems like ultimately, the trade-offs were made by all the parties to kind of get to where we are today. So certainly we'll see how, the ultimate approval and deployment process takes place. So in the meantime, I mean, if I'm a manufacturer or retailer engaged in cross-border trade with Mexico, I mean, what do I need to do in response to these changes, assuming they take, to take place? And again, how can a logistics service provider, help me kind of navigate this new operating environment?
Yes, I strongly believe we all have to revisit the way we've been doing things before. As soon as the regulations are published, and it's going to be a huge booklet, it's not going to be simple to go through it. Seek for advice from a consultant that can help a customer understand the new rules, assess the actual changes that affect their industry from a manufacturing perspective, and come up with a plan as soon as possible. And I'm going to talk about timeframes. If everything gets signed in the next few weeks, we will have something to go and dive regarding regulations. So I will give ourselves the rest of this year, the last quarter, just to understand what was the agreement. And then the first quarter of 2019, really dive into the action plans and the strategies that each individual company should be advising to their upper management, whether that's buying aluminum or steel in the NAFTA region or other type of things that would be of major impact to anyone. It's a must. Adrian. So seek for external advice unless you are a company that has a very considerable internal compliance department, then you can do that on your own. But if not, it is highly recommendable that we collaborate. All of us, even us that do this every day, and we do it for over 500 companies, we're going to be newbies. We're going to be new in this new agreement. So we gotta push ourselves to get acquainted as soon as possible and take it to the next level and convert it into actionable items that we need to do to keep our companies in the right path.
That's great advice and a great, time frame there, to give folks a kind of a roadmap, if you will, of what to expect over the next few weeks and months, which I guess, we're kind of short on time here. So that kind of brings me to my last question. I mean, as a way to, summarize, I think in addition to, the great advice you just provided there, a lot of everything we talked about. I mean, what is the most important thing that companies should take away from this new agreement, and what's the most important thing that they could do, in response? I mean, I think you answered what to do over the next few weeks, but what's the key takeaway here? What should people that are listening to this conversation say? Gosh, I gotta. This is the most important thing I really need to be thinking about after this.
What I would strongly advise is that they look at their 5-year strategy of manufacturing product within the US and Mexico, and look at their sourcing and their raw materials and their finished product, and where is it going to end in talking about global perspective. NAFTA is going to change, the new NAFTA is going to change the way we do things, but from a practical perspective, I can tell you that today, every single customer that we deal with that has manufacturing in Mexico is talking about expansions, or is talking about bringing new assembly lines, or bringing in new suppliers or customers. So I don't hear anyone taking a step back towards growing. So that's a given. And the fact that the rules between the 3 countries are going to change are also a given. The faster we can adapt, the better we can use that new strategy in our 5-year plans for future growth on every single one of our manufacturing customers. They're all very optimistic, Adrian. They're all very positive as far as what they've heard so far. And I'm talking about every single industry that I mentioned before, from automotive to electronic, metal stamping, etc. So it's going to make us all look back into the compliance of leveraging and the relationship between the 3 countries, and making sure that we're giving ourselves the best chance to be competitive globally.
No, great, great advice. I think, I'm sure, we're just at the beginning here of all this. I mean, so negotiations are over, or are presumably over, and now comes the, getting it, ratified, and the hard work of, pulling up your sleeves and making it work, begin. So I'm sure we'll have more to talk about. If we were to have this conversation a year from now, I think it'll be interesting to see, where we are. So certainly, I think we should pencil it in to have you back in the program a year from now to see what's happened over the course of that time, and hopefully over the course of that time, someone will come up with a better acronym and a better name for this new agreement than USMCA, because I'm having a tough time with it. I think we just keep calling it the new NAFTA, and I think that might just be the way people will refer to it. But with that, Jose, we're out of time. So again, I appreciate you making the time to share your insights and advice with us today.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for inviting me.
Great. I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Transplace website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for Jose, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.